In the news today is the reality that illegal erectile dysfunction drugs have exploded almost 200% in 2 years. When you look at the news, and this is what's happening today, you realize that this is a big story. Criminals exploit stigma and embarrassment to sell fake erectile dysfunction drugs, fake vagal warnings after police seized 20 million illegal pills, urgent Valentine's warning after UK seized 20 million dangerous knockoff Viagra pills. So you can see that this is what is dominating the headlines at the moment. What in the world is going on? Is this just something new? Or is this another one of those inconvenient trends that nobody really wants to look at and there is no clear explanation for it? Now, when we talk about erectile dysfunction, there are a few things with regards to anatomy and physiology that are quite important. And so, before I give you some of the statistics, I'm going to be showing you just some basic principles with regards to what it is, what is happening, and just the general science. And then that way you can make sense of why, in my opinion, this is likely to be relevant. Before I start, just a reminder for those people who want to hear unfettered science. Coming up in the next few days is COVID Trapdoor, how your immunity gets depleted by repeated infections. Really important topic, looking at the fact that the SARS-CoV-2 virus can enter via different pathways, trapdoors, especially in immune cells. So please look in the description below for more information about that. So let's get to the science here. This here is the anatomy of the male reproductive system. You can see on either side here are the testes. This is with the skin and so on removed. You have the vas deferens, which takes semen into the prostate gland. And then on ejaculation, in combination with fluid from the seminal vessels, you can then have an ejaculation occurring. The penis itself is largely composed of two parts, which is the the outside. And this is a very sophisticated system. It is not something that just happens randomly. When you look through the sequence of events that occurs in order for a man to have an erection, you realize just how easy it can be if there is any physiological change to disrupt this. And so when you go a little further, the blood flow is exceptionally important here. And when you look at this here, again, this is a side view, and you can see the testicle down here. This is a flaccid penis, and you have the arteries and veins coming in. And essentially, what needs to happen is that in order for an erection to occur, the blood flow from the arteries have to increase, and the blood flow from the veins have to be slowed. And so then you end up with congestion in the penile shaft, which then causes it to become erect. As I said, that is a very complex neurological vascular process that can very easily be disrupted. And then when the necessary parts are controlled in terms of an erect penis here, you can see now that it becomes erect because the blood flow from the arteries is higher than the outflow from the veins in blue. And so it maintains that position until this action has been completed, usually after ejaculation. And so, as I said, when you grasp that, you'll realize why there is likely to be something that has happened in the pandemic period that has impacted on this. Now, let's get into a little bit of the statistics because they're talking about all of these drugs that have been seized and what and why is it happening? How long has it been going on? So when we look at the actual statistics, what I've done is I've got AI to do a detailed analysis looking at all of the prescriptions over a long period of time so that we get a trajectory as to what exactly has happened. So looking at the UK, erectile dysfunction drug demand, legal versus illegal market analysis. And what you can see here is all the way from 2009, the prescriptions were about 2.1 million. And it then gradually increases to about 4.6 million in about 2017. Then in 2019, you then have the, not quite the highest, it's a little bit less than 2018, 4.7 million. So 4.5 million in 2019. And then in the pandemic period, you have a decrease because of lockdowns across the UK. So that's the first important thing. So we see a trajectory with regards to the use, and you can see that there's been a gradual increase over the period of time. So what you will find, people will say, if they're trying to refute what I'm saying, they'll say, well, this has always been increasing over the time frame, and so therefore me making extrapolations about potential mechanisms related to the COVID pandemic may seem as though I'm fishing for stuff. Well, when they tell you that, tell them to look at the data. So let's look some more. What you have to notice here, in all of these years here, illegal seizures by the MHRA, this column not applicable because there was no need. It seemed that people were happy to go and get their prescriptions. And that would suggest that this is an older, more mature cohort who are not concerned about going to the doctor to get a prescription. It's no big deal. What we seem to be coming into with regards to the illegal use may be a cohort of men who feel uncomfortable going to the doctor to ask about this. And it may be, therefore, that this is related to the fact that the doctor may say, well, it's unusual for you to have this. Maybe we should investigate you more. And because men don't like that kind of question, they would prefer to leave it in the background and leave it off the table. When we look at the post-pandemic period, this is where it gets very interesting. 4.2 million, which is a little lower than 4.5, were purchasing it. But look at this. In 2021, 4.6 million illegal in the post-COVID surge. Then it dropped a bit. So this period here in 2021 is like, wow, what in the world happened? Then you can see not only is illegal use increasing, but legal prescriptions in 2025 have reached now 5.2 million. You look at where it was in 2019, 4.5 million. It's now 5.2 million legal prescriptions plus 4.4 million illegal prescriptions. So let's get this right. 4.5 million prescriptions legally in 2019. In 2025, we are talking about 9.6 million prescriptions between legal and illegal, double that of 2019. Maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist. Maybe I just noticed too much. But that is not normal, okay? Something is wrong. And to be frank with you, this, truthfully, I suspected this, but I couldn't get the data. And somehow this newspaper article today caused me to use the power of AI to break through all of the narratives and find the information that I wanted. This is pretty serious. We're talking a 100% increase in the amount of men using erectile dysfunction medication. Now, there's no problem for the fact that men use this because this has always been an issue. But a 100% increase in 6 years has got to be something that is a red flag. Now, when we think about the mechanisms, and so you now go to the science because this is not necessarily new. And when we look at the data or the science here, I've gotten this paper from Spain looking at development of a risk predictive model for erectile dysfunction at 12 months after COVID-19 recovery. So they are looking in this paper at whether or not, after people have had COVID, whether they get erectile dysfunction. So they were predicting erectile dysfunction at 12 months following COVID recovery. And when they looked, it wasn't a huge study, a total of about 361 patients with a past history of COVID, and about 100 of that, it was 166 with a past history, 195 who didn't. And this was between the period of January 2022 to March of 2023. As they look at this here, what they found, the median age was about 55 years in both groups, and the erectile dysfunction prevalence was 55.9 in patients who had a history of COVID and 44.1% in those with no history of COVID. So this suggests that COVID infection is likely to be a contributing factor to erectile dysfunction. We have to think about what the mechanisms are, but straight away, because of the way how my questioning mind works, I check to find out whether or not they speak about the important view in my mind. And yes, they did in the paper. They highlighted that in the conclusion, as such, our findings would take COVID-19 to the level of other well-known determinants of erectile dysfunction. SARS-CoV-2 vaccination was also one of the features selected in our model. Although a link between SARS-CoV-2 vaccination and long COVID has been described, there are few works that have specifically investigated the link between SARS-CoV-2 vaccination and erectile dysfunction to date. And so when they say that although SARS-CoV-2 vaccination had no adverse effect on erectile function in a paper, number 20, reference 27, but the sample did not include recovered COVID-19 patients. Given the known adverse effects of COVID-19 on erectile dysfunction, it would be interesting to assess how SARS-CoV-2 vaccination interacts with erectile function in recovered patients who might already have some level of erectile dysfunction. This is an important discussion because, as you can see, the difference between people who had no infection and those who did, 44%, 55%. So there is a contributing factor from infection, but a 100% increase in the use of drugs in 5 years suggests that infection is not the only factor. That's the elephant in the room. That it seems as though even in the paper, they highlighted that this was a very important question to answer. My perspective is sometimes that one thing is to recognize it. The other thing is to try and explain it. So here is my thought on what is happening. I highlighted here the parasympathetic nervous system coming from the brainstem. The vagal nerve coming all the way down supplies the heart, the lungs, the liver and pancreas, the intestines, and then it merges with sacral parasympathetic fibers, which supply the kidneys, the bladder, in women the uterus, and in men the testes and prostate and penis. And you can see the closer look here of the parasympathetic connection. The reason this is important is because erection is primarily activated by the parasympathetic system. This is what causes the blood vessels to dilate. And in case you don't remember, the blood vessels here, more blood has to come in, less blood has to go out. This is primarily managed by the parasympathetic system. Okay? The reason I've highlighted this is because one of the pieces of research that I've focused on, and in our long COVID paper, we did this, is that the vagal nerve is inflamed in a significant proportion of people. And they oftentimes don't know this is what the problem is, because if you don't recognize the symptoms and the patterns of symptoms, you would not realize that many of the symptoms people are having could be vagal nerve inflammation. And if that is the case, just the reminder, if the vagal nerve is involved in terms of inflammation post-COVID, post-vaccination, suddenly the information that would go to this region, the genitourinary region, would be impacted. And this, in my mind, could explain this very significant change in patterns. So just in case you've just joined me, let me remind you, in 2009, I'll just go over this again, the use legally was about 2.1 million. And as people got more acquainted and more comfortable, this gradually rose to a peak of about 2.7 million in 2018. But notice that illegal seizures, not applicable, because it was easy to get a prescription. And this was more likely older, more mature men who weren't concerned. Then comes the pandemic. And then suddenly we see a massive surge in the illegal use. That's men going online, not through their pharmacy or their doctor, more than what was used in 2021. That in itself is a big red flag. It continues where now we have two things happening in parallel. Between 2021, where it was 4.2 million, it goes to 5.2 million over 5 years legally, plus another 4.4 million in illegal use. Compared to 2019 of 4.5 million, that is almost double the use, 9.6 million in total, combining legal and illegal use of erectile dysfunction drugs. That's your Viagra, Dafinil, Tadafinil. There are quite a number of them. This is pretty serious. And as I said, this is the kind of thing that we would need the scientific community to investigate without worrying about narratives, without trying to protect any particular outcome, and just looking at the hard facts. Because where I think the answer is going to lie is when you look at the illegal market, 4.4 million here, or the 5.5 million in 2024, what are their ages and demographics? If we find that they are younger, without comorbidities, not the same, more mature, older gentlemen, that is an absolute red flag that we are having a serious problem. And what this will then dovetail into is fertility. And therefore, because you can't therefore get anyone pregnant if you can't get an erection. And so therefore you then have the risk of impact longer term on fertility. And we haven't even touched the changes in menstrual bleeding that happens in women and the unusual patterns there. And when you put it all together, this should be front and center for health policy across the world. The fact that it is not, in my view, is an indication of how far we are away from a situation of being objective about what has happened in the pandemic. This, in truth, was a very interesting analysis for me, and I hope you found it just as interesting as well in what you have done. Have a great evening. Look forward to sharing more information with you in the near future.